My name is Lauren, and 3 years ago, if someone had asked me what I was most afraid of, I would have said divorce. Not because I still loved my husband the way I used to. Not because I believed our marriage could be saved. I was afraid because of something he repeated every time we argued. You'll leave with nothing. At first, those words felt like a warning. Eventually, they became something I accepted as truth. We lived outside Dallas, Texas, in a home we had bought 8 years earlier. I worked as a marketing coordinator for a healthcare company. My husband, Brian, owned a small construction business. From the outside, our life looked comfortable. Inside our house, everything revolved around control. Brian handled every financial decision. He paid the mortgage, managed the bank accounts, filed the taxes, and made sure I never knew exactly where our money was. Whenever I asked questions, he smiled like I was a child. Don't worry about it. I've got everything covered. I wanted to believe that was partnership. Now I know it wasn't. It was control, dressed up as responsibility. The changes happened so slowly that I barely noticed them. First, he stopped discussing money with me. Then he started criticizing every purchase I made. If I bought new shoes for work, he asked why I wasted money. If I ordered dinner after a long day, he reminded me how expensive restaurants had become. Meanwhile, he bought new tools, expensive watches, and weekend hunting equipment without saying a word. Whenever I pointed out the difference, he laughed. That's different. I actually earned the real money. Those words hurt more than I admitted. I worked full-time. I paid household bills. I cooked most nights. I handled doctor's appointments, birthdays, vacations, and every invisible responsibility that kept our life together. Still, somehow, I felt like a guest in my own marriage. The worst part wasn't the money. It was how small I had become. I started asking permission before buying things I could easily afford. I apologized for taking up space. I second-guessed every opinion. One Saturday afternoon, my younger sister Emily came over for coffee. She looked around the kitchen before quietly asking, "Are you happy?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know how to answer. Emily reached across the table. "You don't have to protect him when you're talking to me." I stared into my coffee. I don't think he respects me anymore. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Then she asked something that stayed with me for weeks. "Do you respect yourself?" I couldn't answer. That silence scared me more than anything Brian had ever said. A month later, things became worse. Brian announced he was taking a fishing trip with friends. The trip lasted 5 days. When he returned, he acted as though nothing had happened. But something inside me had changed. I realized I had stopped missing him whenever he left. Instead, I felt peaceful. That realization was impossible to ignore. One evening after dinner, I finally asked him if we could talk. He barely looked up from his phone. "What now? I don't think we're partners anymore." He sighed dramatically. "You're overthinking again. I just want us to make decisions together." He put his phone down and leaned back. "Lauren, this house exists because of me." I stayed quiet. He continued, "My business pays for this lifestyle." I knew that wasn't true. My paycheck had covered countless expenses for years, but facts didn't matter to him. Only control did. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "If you ever divorce me, you'll walk away with nothing." He said it calmly, confidently, as though it were already decided. I didn't argue. For the first time in years, I simply nodded. Okay, that one word seemed to confuse him. Usually I defended myself. Usually I cried. Usually I tried to fix things. This time, I cleared the dishes and went upstairs. The next morning, during my lunch break, I searched for a family law attorney. Not because I had decided to file for divorce, because I needed to know whether the fear I had been living with was actually true. I scheduled a consultation for the following Friday. I didn't tell anyone, not even Emily. The attorney's office was warm, quiet, and nothing like I expected. I sat across from a woman named Jennifer who asked me one simple question. "What brings you here today?" I took a deep breath. My husband says if I leave, I'll leave with nothing. She didn't react with surprise. She simply smiled kindly. Let's find out whether that's true. For the next hour, she asked questions about our marriage, our home, our income, our savings, and our finances. Then she folded her hands. "Lauren, you have more rights than you think." I felt my heart begin to race. Everything Brian had repeated for years suddenly felt uncertain. Jennifer reached for a folder. "Before you make any decisions," she said, "there's something I think you need to see." She slid a document across the desk. The moment I looked at the first page, I realized my husband had been hiding something far bigger than I ever imagined. I stared at the document for several seconds before I could even process what I was reading. It wasn't a divorce paper. It wasn't a court filing. It was a public property record. Jennifer pointed to one line with her pen. "According to county records, your home is jointly owned." I blinked. I thought, he told me everything was in his name. She shook her head. "No, your name is on the deed." I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. For years, Brian had repeated the same sentence. "You'll leave with nothing." He had said it so often that I stopped questioning it. But it had never been true. Jennifer continued gently. "Lauren, I can't promise you the outcome of every issue if you divorce. Every case is different. But I can tell you this, you have legal rights. No one gets to erase those simply by saying they do." I nodded, trying to hold back tears. She wasn't giving me false hope. She was giving me something much more valuable, the truth. Before I left, she handed me a checklist. "Start gathering copies of your financial records. Bank statements, tax returns, retirement accounts, mortgage documents. Don't announce anything. Just get organized." For the first time in years, I walked out of a building feeling lighter instead of heavier. I didn't file for divorce that day. I went home. And I became very quiet. Not cold, not cruel, just calm. Over the next several weeks, I followed Jennifer's advice. I made copies of important documents. I opened a checking account in my own name. I redirected my paycheck there after making sure household obligations would still be covered appropriately. I created a realistic budget. Most importantly, I stopped asking Brian for permission to exist. If I wanted to have lunch with my sister, I went. If I wanted to take a Saturday morning yoga class, I signed up. If he criticized every little decision, I no longer defended myself. I simply said, "I've made my decision." That sentence became my new boundary. At first, he laughed. Then he became irritated. Finally, he became confused. One evening, he asked, "Why don't you argue with me anymore?" I looked at him and answered honestly. Because arguing never changed anything. Silence filled the room. For the first time, he didn't have a response. A few weeks later, I met with Jennifer again. After reviewing everything, we agreed it was time to move forward. Filing for divorce was not the easiest decision of my life. It was the healthiest. When Brian was served with the papers, he called me immediately. His voice wasn't angry. It was shocked. "You can't be serious. I am. You'll regret this. I don't think I will." Then he said the sentence I had heard for years. "You know you'll leave with nothing." This time, I didn't feel afraid. I answered calmly, "I've spoken with an attorney." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. It was the first time I realized his confidence had depended on my ignorance. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were meetings, paperwork, negotiations. Some days were emotionally exhausting. But every step forward reminded me why I had started. This wasn't about winning against Brian. It was about no longer losing myself. Eventually, we reached a fair settlement. The outcome wasn't magical. Neither of us got everything we wanted. But I received my legal share of our marital assets, including my interest in the home, along with other financial arrangements that reflected the life we had built together. More importantly, I left with something I had almost forgotten I deserved: my dignity. 6 months later, I rented a small townhouse with large windows and a tiny backyard. It wasn't as big as our old house. It didn't need to be. Every piece of furniture was something I had chosen. Every picture on the wall reflected my life. Every decision belonged to me. One Sunday morning, Emily came over carrying coffee and fresh bagels. She looked around my living room and smiled. "You seem different." "I am." She laughed softly. "You finally look peaceful." I thought about that for a moment. Peace wasn't something Brian had taken from me overnight. I had slowly handed it away by believing I had no choice. Now I knew better. Looking back, I don't hate my ex-husband. Holding on to bitterness would only keep me connected to a chapter that had already ended. Instead, I'm grateful for one lesson. Fear grows in silence. Confidence grows in truth. The day I stopped believing someone else's version of my future was the day I started creating my own. If you're listening to my story while wondering whether your voice matters, whether your boundaries are too much, or whether respect is something you have to earn, I hope you remember this. A healthy marriage is built on honesty, partnership, and mutual respect. The moment someone convinces you that you have no value without them, it's time to learn the facts for yourself. Sometimes the strongest comeback isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stop accepting less than you deserve. And sometimes walking away doesn't leave you with nothing. Sometimes it helps you find yourself again. If this story touched you, please comment and subscribe. I have one question for you. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? And what helped you find your voice again? Let me know your answer below.